It started with something I never thought would happen in a million years. I ended up tangled in an affair with my best friend's wife. I know how that sounds, like some cliché story of drunken stupidity. But this wasn't a careless mistake fueled by one too many drinks. No, it felt more like I'd been lured into a well-laid trap. And by the time I realized just how far I'd fallen, it was already too late to crawl out. To explain how I ended up here, I have to take you back to the beginning. Back when everything seemed picture-perfect. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Wendy. God. She was everything to me. When you marry someone, you imagine a lifetime together. That's the promise, right? Wendy and I were together for over 10 years, 6 of those as husband and wife. And during all that time, I put her at the center of my world. She wasn't just some prize on my arm. Wendy was stunning, yes, but she was sharp too. So sharp that she could cut you down with a single look. Her confidence made others feel smaller, and yet somehow I was the one she chose. At least that's how I saw it. Looking back now, I can't believe I'm talking about her this way, but that's where we are. Then there was my job. I work in financial consulting, a solid career that pays well but comes with a price. There's constant travel, nights spent alone in sterile hotel rooms, and endless late-night emails. But none of that ever bothered me. Wendy seemed to get it, or at least I thought she did. I convinced myself that as long as I was providing, pulling my weight, everything would be fine. And then there was Elton, my best friend since college. Elton was one of those guys who could charm the teeth off a snake. Women were drawn to him like moths to a flame, and believe me, he loved every bit of it. But even Elton, eventually, claimed he was ready to settle down. He married Madison, a quiet, intelligent woman whose calm, composed nature seemed to tame his wild side. I was genuinely happy for him. Elton and Wendy got along great, and when the 4 of us spent time together, life felt complete. You know that old saying, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is? I ignored it. I didn't see what was coming. A few years ago, I stumbled onto Elton's dirty little secret. It was an ordinary night, or so I thought. We were having dinner at my place, the usual thing. After we ate, we started clearing the dishes. Elton left his phone on the counter for just a moment, and that's when it happened. A notification popped up, and while I didn't mean to pry, my eyes couldn't help but catch the words. Can't wait to see you tonight. It wasn't from Madison. One glance turned into a deep dive. Before I knew it, I was scrolling through his texts, my stomach twisting with each discovery. There it all was. Flirty messages, hidden rendezvous, and even photos that left no doubt. Elton had been sleeping with a younger coworker, and I suddenly had the receipts to prove it. I didn't hold back. I confronted him on the spot. Straight up, no dancing around it. I laid out everything I knew, and while Elton tried to play it off like it was no big deal, I wasn't having it. I told him he needed to end it, cut things off and fix his marriage. I swore I'd keep quiet, but only if he promised to stop. Reluctantly, he agreed. I thought that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Then came the night that set everything in motion, the night the cracks started to show. Elton and Madison came over for dinner, just like before. Wendy was in the kitchen, busy with something, while I poured drinks. That's when I noticed Madison acting off. Her eyes were glued to Elton and Wendy, her face tight, like she was holding back words she didn't dare say. At first, I figured she'd just had a rough day. I didn't think much of it. But then Madison leaned in close to me and whispered something that made my stomach drop. Have you ever wondered if there's more between them than just friendship? Madison's words cut through the air like a blade. At first, I chuckled, trying to play it cool. But when I looked back at her, she wasn't laughing. Her expression was dead serious. I think Elton is cheating on me, she said, her voice low and steady. And I think it's with your wife. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My gut reaction was to dismiss it. Tell her she was losing it. Wendy? Cheat on me? No way. And Elton wouldn't dare be that reckless. But Madison's eyes were locked on mine, unwavering, like she knew something I didn't. Just watch them, she whispered, her tone chillingly calm. See how they act together. So I looked. We both did. We turned toward the living room, careful not to make it obvious. Were Wendy and Elton sitting too close? Maybe. Were they laughing a little too hard at some joke the rest of us weren't part of? My brain screamed no, but my stomach twisted into knots. Then it happened. Wendy's hand brushed against Elton's arm. An innocent gesture, maybe. But the way Elton looked at her in that split second made my insides churn. "This isn't the first time," Madison added, her voice barely audible but sharp enough to flay me open. "I think they've been meeting behind our backs." My head started spinning, but I forced myself to keep it together. I didn't want to believe her. Sure, Wendy and I had our ups and downs. What couple doesn't? But cheating? That wasn't us. I clung to that thought like a life raft in a storm. But Madison's words were like a tiny crack in a window. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, that crack started spreading. At first, I told myself Madison was projecting her own problems onto me. Elton was no saint, and maybe she was just paranoid, looking for someone to blame. But once she planted that seed of doubt in my mind, there was no getting rid of it. It grew, slow and insidious, until I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. Or maybe, things I'd just been pretending not to see. I began watching Wendy more closely. Every time she smiled at her phone, my chest tightened. Every time she stepped out of the room to take a call, I found myself holding my breath. I hated it, but I couldn't stop. That nagging suspicion clawed at me until it took over. And that's when I crossed a line. I did things I'd always sworn I'd never do, things I never thought I was capable of doing. I started checking Wendy's phone when she wasn't looking. Late at night, I'd scroll through her social media, searching for something, anything, that would prove Madison wrong or confirm my worst fears. But I found nothing. Her phone was spotless, her social media immaculate. No suspicious texts, no shady apps, no secret photos. For a moment, I let myself feel relieved. Maybe I was losing my mind. But that relief didn't last. If there were no signs, it didn't mean Wendy was innocent. It just meant she was careful, meticulously good at covering her tracks. And once that thought latched onto me, I was done for. I became consumed. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and check her phone again, scrolling like a man possessed, certain I'd missed something before. My mind ran wild, filling in blanks that didn't even exist. Every unexplained laugh, every late-night text. Suddenly, it all felt like evidence. And Madison? She was the gasoline to my fire. She knew exactly what to say to keep my doubt alive. Little messages here and there, never enough to accuse anyone outright, but just enough to keep me spinning. One day, I saw Elton texting Wendy. The notification vanished before I could read it, but Madison was right there in my inbox. "Do you think they meet for lunch when you're at work?" She didn't have to shout it. She didn't have to prove anything. The damage was already done. Madison knew exactly what she was doing, and I was tangled so tightly in suspicion, I couldn't see a way out. Every time I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, Madison would pull me right back into that spiral of doubt. I couldn't tell if she was sincerely trying to help me or if she was taking some kind of incomprehensible pleasure in watching me squirm. But by then, it didn't matter. I was already in too deep. I had to know the truth, no matter how ugly it might be. Eventually, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Wendy had casually mentioned she'd be meeting a friend in the city, and I pretended to be completely unbothered. I even smiled and told her to enjoy herself. But inside, my mind was spinning, and my plan was already set. I cut out of work early and headed home. I didn't have a clear idea of what I expected to find. Elton's car in the driveway, maybe, or the two of them caught off guard, laughing too close, acting like the rest of the world didn't exist. I didn't know what I was looking for. All I knew was that I had to see it with my own eyes. But when I pulled into the driveway, the house was silent. Too silent. No car. No sounds. Just that oppressive, heavy stillness that made my skin crawl and my thoughts race. I went inside anyway, feeling like a fool as I searched the house. Peeking into closets, opening doors, scanning corners, as if I'd catch them hiding like kids playing a stupid game. But there was nothing. The place was empty, just as it should have been. Hours later, Wendy walked through the door, cheerful and relaxed like everything was perfectly normal. I was sitting on the couch, trying to look casual, even though I'd spent the afternoon pacing through rooms, searching for ghosts. Her expression flickered when she saw me there, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. "Hey, I thought you'd be working late," she said, dropping her purse by the door, her tone light and breezy. "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Things wrapped up earlier than I expected. How about you? How was your day?" She flashed me one of those perfect smiles, the kind that once made me believe everything was fine. "It was good. Stayed out longer than I planned, but it was nice to catch up." She shrugged like it was nothing, like this was just any other day. "Where'd you go?" I asked, trying to sound neutral even though every word felt like a stone in my throat. She didn't miss a beat. "Just stayed in the city. Window shopping, long lunch, that kind of thing." Her voice was smooth, too smooth. She breezed past me toward the kitchen, as if the conversation was already over. I nodded, pretending to accept her answer. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It was too quick, too polished, like she'd practiced it. Or maybe I was losing my mind. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being honest with me. Suspicion does that to you. Once it takes root, it burrows deeper and deeper until it consumes everything. Suddenly, the smallest details feel like evidence. The smile she gave her phone. The way she brushed off my questions. Even the way she said goodnight. It all felt wrong. On the surface, Wendy and I kept up appearances. We had dinners together, made small talk, even managed to do everything we could as spouses. But it was all empty, like we were just playing roles, going through the motions. The more I watched her, the more disconnected I felt. Nights were the worst. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts churning endlessly. Where was Wendy really going when she said she was out? Who was she texting when that little smile crept onto her face? Every time Elton's name came up in conversation, it twisted something inside me until I felt sick. And Madison? She was always there, pouring just enough fuel on the fire to keep it burning. She had this way of saying just the right thing at just the right time to push me over the edge. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Madison. "Guess who I saw at the mall today?" "Elton." And Wendy was with him. My stomach dropped. Wendy had told me she'd been home all day. I tried to keep it together, but my pulse was already racing. That night, I asked her about it, trying to sound casual, as if I didn't already have Madison's message seared into my brain. "Oh yeah," Wendy said, barely looking up from her phone, her tone so calm it felt almost rehearsed. "Why?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay steady. "Just curious," I said, but even as I spoke, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. She wasn't rattled. She wasn't defensive. She was calm. Too calm. And that calmness? It scared me more than anything else. That was the thing about Wendy. She was too smooth. She could turn any accusation into a joke or brush it aside with such effortless calm that, even when I knew something felt wrong, she made me doubt myself. She had a way of making me feel like I was the crazy one for even thinking it. And Madison? She wasn't helping. Every chance she got, she'd drop another comment about Wendy and Elton. These chance encounters, she always seemed to witness, as if she were keeping me on a leash, pulling me deeper into my own paranoia. Madison made sure I couldn't see anything clearly. I didn't know if she was helping me uncover the truth or just getting some sick thrill out of watching me unravel. One night, I came up with a plan. I told Wendy I had a late meeting. She smiled, kissed me goodbye, and said she'd be home when I got back, like it was any other day. But instead of heading to work, I trailed her. I followed her car through the city, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My mind was racing with the confrontation I'd planned, the speech I'd give when I finally caught her red-handed. But there was nothing. I watched as she pulled into a grocery store. I sat there in my car, stunned, as I watched her go inside and emerge 20 minutes later with a bag of eggs, bread, and a bottle of wine. Just a simple, ordinary shopping trip. No secret meetings, no clandestine rendezvous. It didn't make sense. If Wendy wasn't meeting Elton, Then why did Madison keep telling me they were together? Was Wendy just that good at hiding things? Or was Madison playing games with me? The uncertainty was unbearable. It gnawed at me constantly, clawing its way deeper into my thoughts until I couldn't escape it. The paranoia didn't fade. It only got worse. That night, as Wendy climbed into bed beside me, I couldn't hold it in any longer. My heart pounded as I turned to her. "Wendy?" I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you think maybe Elton's gotten too close to you?" She blinked at me, caught off guard. Then her expression shifted. First confusion, then irritation, and something else, deeper, that I couldn't quite place. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual even though my pulse was racing. "I don't know. It's just, I've noticed how close you two are." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw real fire in them. "Jesus, Benjamin. Elton's my friend. That's it. What the hell is wrong with you?" I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But the way she reacted, so quick, so angry, didn't sit right with me. If she really had nothing to hide, why get so defensive? Why blow up like that? The doubts kept piling on top of each other, and I felt like I was suffocating beneath them. Then Madison invited me over for dinner. I don't know why I went, but I did. It started off innocent enough. A shared bottle of wine, laughter, conversation that felt like a reprieve from everything spinning in my head. But then we opened a second bottle and things shifted. We were buzzed. The kind of buzz where the edges of reality blur and inhibitions start to crumble. Madison leaned in, her voice dropping to a low, seductive whisper. "If they're betraying us, why not do the same?" I let out a weak laugh, trying to deflect. "Come on, Madison. What are you talking about?" But she wasn't joking. Her hand brushed against mine, lingering there just a little too long, and suddenly the air between us was charged. Heavy. "Think about it, Benjamin," she said softly, her voice dripping with something dangerous. "What's the point in being loyal if they're not?" I wish I could say I laughed it off and walked away. I wish I could tell you I was strong enough to shut it down. But I wasn't. The wine, the frustration, the anger, the betrayal. It all swirled together in my mind until I couldn't think straight. One moment, we were sitting across from each other, and the next, we were tangled up on her couch, our hands and mouths moving like we'd lost all sense. It was reckless, stupid, and it was dangerous in a way I couldn't even process. But for those few moments, it felt like the only thing in my world that made sense. A way to fight back against everything that had fallen apart. Afterward, I sat there, a hollow mess of guilt and confusion. Madison lit a cigarette, her lips curling into that smug grin she always seemed to wear. "We should record this," she said casually, exhaling a thin stream of smoke like we were discussing the weather. "In case we need proof." I should have argued. I should have told her she was out of her mind. But I was too far gone, too drunk, too numb to fight. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and let it capture everything. Every mistake, every second. At that moment, I didn't care about the consequences. I didn't care about anything. But later, as I sat there staring at the ceiling in the dark, I realized there was no turning back. Whatever line I just crossed, it was gone. And I couldn't undo it. Our bodies, our anger, our betrayal. It had felt, for a fleeting moment, like the ultimate revenge. A way to fight back against the doubt, the lies, and the resentment that had been eating me alive. But as the rush of adrenaline bled away, the guilt came crashing down like a freight train. What the hell had I done? I woke up the next morning to a pounding headache and a stomach twisted into knots. For the briefest moment, I prayed it had all been some sick, drunken nightmare. But when I turned my head, reality hit me like a slap to the face. Madison was lying next to me, stretched out like she didn't have a care in the world, a self-satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She looked like the cat that got the canary, while I felt like the idiot who'd just thrown his entire life into a blender. I sat up, running my hands over my face, trying to breathe through the chaos in my head. Everything about this was wrong. I'd known it from the second I crossed that line, but now there was no undoing it. Madison, of course, seemed completely unfazed. She stretched her arms lazily, flashing me that smug smile like we just shared some kind of twisted joke. "We need to show them," she said, her voice unsettlingly calm. My brain was foggy, the wine and shame still swirling through me. I blinked at her, trying to process. "What? The video?" I croaked, my voice barely there. Madison lit a cigarette, exhaling a thin stream of smoke as though none of this was a big deal. "It's time," she said simply. "Jesus, Madison. What the hell are you talking about?" I rasped, my stomach churning. Her gaze locked onto mine, cold and unwavering. "We have to confront them, Benjamin. They need to know what happens when they screw us over." I felt like I was going to throw up. The betrayal, the shame, the sheer stupidity of it all churned in my gut like poison. "Madison?" I started, unsure of what I even wanted to say. "Yes, you do." She cut me off sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. "There's no going back now. They deserve this." The look in her eyes terrified me. There was no reasoning with her, no backing out. I felt trapped, like I'd stumbled into some dark, twisted game I couldn't escape. And maybe she was right. Maybe I had gone too far to turn back now. So, against every screaming instinct I had, I nodded. The confrontation happened the next evening. Wendy walked through the door, her usual composed, graceful self. I sat there on the couch, barely holding myself together, my palms slick with sweat. My heart hammered in my chest as she looked at me with her usual indifference, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "What's going on?" she asked, narrowing her eyes as I gestured for her to sit down. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out. "I need to show you something." My voice was brittle, breaking under the weight of what I was about to do. She crossed her arms, clearly annoyed. "What is this about, Benjamin?" I didn't answer. I just pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled to the video and hit play. The screen flickered to life. A grainy, drunken mess of Madison and me, tangled up in a reckless, desperate mistake. I couldn't bring myself to look at Wendy. I stared at the floor instead, bracing for the explosion that I knew was coming. When the video ended, the silence was so heavy it felt like it might crush me. Slowly, I looked up. Wendy was sitting perfectly still, her face pale, her eyes wide. But there was no shock, no sadness, just pure, unfiltered rage. "You did this?" she whispered, her voice low and cold, like the calm before a storm. I blinked, my mind scrambling to catch up. "I never betrayed you, Benjamin," she said, her tone rising with every word. "Not once. And you did this." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she was already on her feet, her face twisted with disgust. "You slept with Madison because you convinced yourself there was something going on? Are you insane?" Before I could get a word in, the front door swung open and Elton walked in, his face a mask of confusion. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, his voice sharp as he looked between us. Madison, standing off to the side, wasted no time. "We know everything, Elton," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "We know about you and Wendy." Elton's brows shot up, his expression morphing from confusion to disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" Wendy spun on him, her voice slicing through the room like a knife. "She thinks we're having an affair," she spat, her anger boiling over. Elton's face fell, his eyes wide with shock. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. "You think Wendy and I—" He stopped mid-sentence, shaking his head in disbelief. "Are you serious right now? You actually believe that?" The anger in his voice matched Wendy's, and for the first time, the absurdity of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. I had set this fire, and now it was burning everything to the ground. "Jesus Christ. Madison, you're insane," Elton barked, his voice breaking through the chaos. And then, just like that, the real truth came crashing down. Elton turned to me, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something I couldn't yet understand. "You want to know what this is all about, Benjamin? She's punishing me." I froze. Elton's voice was laced with fury. "Madison found out about my affair years ago, And now she's dragged you into her little revenge scheme. I whipped my head toward Madison, hoping for some kind of denial. But she didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Instead, she looked me dead in the eye and shrugged, her voice cool and unbothered. "You deserved it," she said to Elton. Then she turned to me, lips curling into that cold, smug smile. "I just gave you a nudge, Benjamin. The rest? That was all you." The floor dropped out from under me. Everything, the suspicious texts, the whispered doubts, the carefully placed hints, had been orchestrated by her. Madison had spun her twisted game, and like a fool, I'd fallen straight into the trap. I felt sick. Wendy's laugh broke the silence. A cold, bitter sound that cut through me like glass. "You're pathetic, Benjamin," she hissed, her eyes flashing with disgust. "You let her manipulate you into destroying our marriage. All because you couldn't trust me." I tried to speak, to explain, to beg for forgiveness. But the words tangled in my throat, and Wendy wasn't interested. "It's too late for that," she snapped, her voice sharp and final. "You threw everything away. Everything." Elton shook his head at Madison, his expression one of pure contempt. "I'm done," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're done, Madison. For good." The fallout that followed was swift and brutal. Within days, Wendy and I filed for divorce. She couldn't forgive me, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. I had let jealousy, paranoia, and my own insecurities rot away everything we'd built. Elton, true to his word, walked out of his marriage without a second thought, leaving Madison to deal with the ashes of the chaos she'd created. After that night, none of us spoke again. 2 marriages were shattered beyond repair. And for what? Some twisted game born out of lies, revenge, and suspicion. In the days that followed, everything collapsed into an empty, silent void. My life felt like a wreckage site, and I was standing alone in the ruins trying to make sense of it all. Wendy was gone. Elton was gone. Madison, I couldn't even bring myself to think about her. Worst of all, I was left with myself, haunted by the choices I'd made, the ones that had torn my entire world apart. The silence in my apartment was unbearable. Days blurred into nights. I'd sit on the couch, nursing a bottle of whiskey and replaying every fight, every lie, every missed sign. I tried to convince myself that Wendy had been innocent, that I'd destroyed my marriage for nothing. But the truth was so much worse. I had let my insecurities, my paranoia, destroy the woman I thought was my forever. And now I was left with nothing but regret. Wendy moved on quickly. Too quickly. I'd catch glimpses of her life on social media, laughing, traveling, living what looked like a perfect life, untouched by the wreckage we'd been through. Meanwhile, I was sinking deeper. It was like I'd been erased, a forgotten footnote in her story. While I was still stuck in the spiral I couldn't escape, then, out of nowhere, it happened. I was sprawled out on my bed one night, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when a notification popped up. An anonymous number. No subject line, just a string of photos attached. Something about it pulled at me, and against my better judgment I opened the message. And there she was, Wendy, smiling, kissing someone else. The photos were personal, moments wrapped up in warmth with a man I didn't know. My heart pounded as I swiped through image after image, each one a punch to the gut. Dinner dates, hotel rooms, vacations. And then I saw the timestamps. They weren't recent. They were years old, right during our marriage. Wendy had been having an affair, not with Elton, with someone else. The realization hit me like a wrecking ball. This wasn't a single mistake, a fleeting lapse in judgment. This had been a relationship, something long, deliberate, and hidden right under my nose. I stared at the photos, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. The worst part? It had been in front of me the whole time. I'd been so blinded by my own paranoia, so tangled in Madison's lies, that I never saw the truth. I'd spent all that time doubting Wendy, chasing shadows with Elton, while the real betrayal had been right there, happening behind my back. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or laugh at the cruel irony of it all. My hands shook as I dropped the phone onto the bed. The weight of everything, the choices I'd made, the trust I'd broken, and the betrayal I never saw, pressed down on me until I thought I might suffocate. I'd destroyed my marriage over lies and suspicion. And all along, Wendy had been lying to me, playing me. And now I had nothing left. Nothing but the truth I'd fought so hard to find, and it was the one thing I wished I'd never seen. All that paranoia about Elton. It turned out to be nothing but a smoke screen, a diversion that kept me blind to the real betrayal happening right under my nose. While I obsessed over shadows, Wendy had been living a double life, and I had been too foolish to see it. I thought I'd hit rock bottom before, but this was a new, unrelenting kind of hell. It wasn't just the betrayal that tore me apart. It was realizing I destroyed everything. My marriage, my friendships. While the real truth had been staring me in the face the whole time. I felt like the world's biggest idiot. After it all came crashing down, I was just drifting. The person I used to be felt like a stranger. Waking up in that empty apartment was suffocating. The silence pressing in on me like a lead weight. Every corner of that place was a cruel reminder of the life I'd lost. The bed I used to share with Wendy, the kitchen where we'd spent hours laughing, the couch where we'd curled up together for lazy Sunday movie marathons. It all mocked me. It felt familiar, yet so far out of reach. I couldn't stand it. The days blurred into each other. I drank more than I should, barely slept, and spent endless hours scrolling through Wendy's social media. Even though I knew it would only make the pain worse. There she was, smiling in photos, laughing, traveling, living a carefree life like I had never existed. It was like she'd figured out how to move on while I was still drowning in the wreckage she left behind. That apartment became my prison. Every minute spent there made me feel heavier, like I was sinking deeper into a hole I couldn't climb out of. One morning, something inside me snapped. I couldn't take another second of it. I threw some clothes into a bag, grabbed my passport, and booked the first flight I could find. I didn't care where it was going. I just knew I needed to get out. No plan, no destination, just a desperate urge to put as much distance as possible between me and the ruins of my life. I spent the next few months wandering aimlessly. I bounced between cities, countries, anywhere that felt far enough away. Cheap hotels became my temporary homes. I lived out of a single suitcase, drifting from one place to another. I wandered through narrow old streets, browsed through crowded markets, drank too much at dive bars, and sat alone in anonymous cafes, staring into space and trying to piece together what little was left of me. But no matter how far I went, the loneliness followed. It was always there, lurking in every quiet moment, creeping into every silent pause. I thought the distance would help me find clarity, maybe even peace, but the pain didn't care about geography. It clung to me, gnawing at my insides until there was nothing left but an empty shell of who I used to be. Then, one evening, I ended up in a small coastal town. The kind of place where time seemed to slow down, where the waves rolled in with a rhythm so steady it felt like the town's heartbeat. There was something soothing about it, a calmness I hadn't felt in months. That's where I met Patricia. She was sitting at the bar when I walked in, a glass of wine in front of her, staring into the distance like she was a million miles away. There was something about her that pulled me in. Maybe it was the tiredness in her eyes or the way her shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight, like she was fighting her own silent battles. I hadn't been looking for company, but somehow, I found myself sliding onto the stool beside her. We started with small talk, the weather, the beach, the food in the town. It was meaningless conversation, but there was an unspoken connection beneath it, an understanding, like we could sense the broken pieces in each other without needing to say it out loud. As the night stretched on, the conversation deepened. Patricia talked about her breakup, the man she had given everything to, the way he shattered her trust and left her trying to pick up the pieces. This time was different, she said quietly, swirling the wine in her glass. This time, it drained me. I listened, nodding along as she spoke, every word hitting me in a way I didn't expect. I understood her pain, really understood it, because I'd been there too. It wasn't just heartbreak. It was that feeling of having your foundation ripped out from under you, of waking up every day wondering who you even are anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel completely alone. There was an unspoken connection between Patricia and me, one of those quiet understandings that only happens when you've been broken yourself. It's like you can see the invisible scars on someone else, even when they're hidden from the world. As the night stretched on, our conversation grew deeper. Patricia opened up about her past, about the man she had trusted completely, the one who shattered her. She told me this wasn't the first time she'd been hurt, but it was the one that drained her, the betrayal that made her question everything she thought she knew about love and trust. I listened, nodding quietly because I understood. Every word she said echoed something in me. I had been there. Hell, I was still there. When it was my turn, I told her my story. Not everything. Not the video, not the ugliest, darkest parts of it, but enough. Enough for her to know I wasn't just some guy drifting through town. I was a man running from his past, trying to escape the wreckage I'd created. In the days that followed, Patricia and I kept running into each other. It wasn't planned. We'd pass each other during quiet walks on the beach, meet up at the same cafe for lunch, or cross paths at the bar in the evening. Every encounter felt natural, effortless, like we'd known each other longer than we had. There was something about her that felt safe. She didn't pry or push. She didn't try to fix me. The silences between us weren't awkward or heavy. They were comforting, like she understood the things I couldn't quite say yet. I was still careful, though. After everything with Wendy, trusting someone felt like stepping off the edge of a cliff. I wasn't ready to let anyone get too close. But Patricia didn't rush me. She just let me be. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to lower my walls. We talked about more than just our pain. We shared hopes and dreams. Even if we spoke about them like fragile things we weren't ready to believe in yet. There was something soothing about imagining a future, no matter how far away it felt. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent into the horizon, we sat together on the beach. The sky was painted in streaks of gold and orange, and the waves rolled in gently, a rhythmic heartbeat against the shore. The cool sand buried our feet, grounding us as the world seemed to grow quieter. That night, I finally let it all out. I told Patricia everything. Not just the sanitized version of my story, but the whole truth. The paranoia that ate away at me, the web of lies I'd let myself believe, the mistakes I made that shattered everything. I told her about Madison, the video, the fallout that left me standing alone in the ruins of my life. I braced myself for her reaction. I expected her to recoil, to look at me differently, to judge me for the choices I'd made. But she didn't. Patricia just sat there, listening, her gaze steady and kind. When I finally finished, when the words had left me feeling raw and exposed, she gave me a small, sad smile. "We all make mistakes, Benjamin," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth I hadn't felt in so long. "What matters is what you do next." It was like something shifted inside me. A weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying lifted just enough for me to breathe. I'd spent so much time punishing myself, drowning in guilt and regret, fixating on what I'd done wrong. I was so busy looking back that I hadn't even thought about what might come next. But that night, sitting on the beach with Patricia, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid to find out. Patricia and I spent the next few weeks together, unburdened by expectations. There were no labels, no promises of forever. Just two broken people learning to live with their scars without letting them define who we were. It felt real in a way I hadn't experienced before. When the time came for me to leave, I didn't feel the dread that usually comes with goodbyes. We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. But there was no grand farewell, no tearful speeches. Just a quiet understanding that whatever the future held, we would both be okay. On my last night in that little coastal town, I found myself sitting alone on the beach, staring out at the waves as they washed away the footprints in the sand. The sky glowed with streaks of orange and pink, and the air was heavy with the salty scent of the ocean. I let myself think about everything: Wendy, Elton, Madison, the man I used to be, and the man I wanted to become. It was there, in that stillness, that a quiet truth hit me. Life isn't about controlling every outcome. It's about learning to let go. forgiving yourself, and trusting that no matter how dark the storm, there's always light on the other side if you're willing to look for it. I stood up, brushing the sand from my clothes, and smiled a real smile, for the first time in what felt like years. I knew the road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for once, that uncertainty didn't scare me. I could take it one step at a time, rebuild from the ground up, and maybe, just maybe, find something worth holding on to again. Life had ripped everything apart, but it had also given me a chance to start over. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. It's been about a year since my life imploded and I left that small beach town. I figured it was time for an update. Not because I have it all figured out now, but because things are different, better even. For a long time, I wasn't sure I'd ever get to this point. The weight of it all, Wendy, Elton, Madison, and the mess I made, clung to me like a second skin I couldn't peel off. But slowly, and with a lot of effort, I started to shed it piece by piece. It's not perfect. Some days are still harder than others. But I've learned that healing isn't a straight path. Some scars are always going to be there, and that's okay. After leaving the beach town, I moved to a city a couple of states away, a place where nobody knew my name or my past. It was a clean slate. I rented a small apartment, nothing special, but it was enough. A quiet space where I could start building a new life from scratch. At first, waking up every day in that silence felt strange, almost unsettling. The stillness, which used to suffocate me, now began to feel peaceful. I learned to embrace it instead of fearing it. It wasn't the sound of failure or emptiness. It was the sound of possibility. Patricia and I stayed in touch. We'd text, call, and even visit each other when we could. But from the very beginning, we both understood we were never meant to be more than a chapter in each other's lives. And that was okay. Not every connection needs to last forever to matter. Sometimes people come into your life to remind you of something important, to help you heal just enough to keep going. Patricia did that for me, and I'll always be grateful. The truth is, I'm still figuring things out. I'm still building. But for the first time, I'm not looking back anymore. I'm not drowning in regret, or obsessing over what went wrong, or chasing ghosts I can't change. I'm looking forward. I'm letting myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I can be whole again. And you know what? That's enough. For now, that's enough. Patricia came into my life at just the right moment, and I like to think I did the same for her. We still check in from time to time, simple "how are you" messages, catching up to make sure the other person's doing all right. There's no drama, no lingering feelings, just respect and gratitude for the roles we played in helping each other heal. She was exactly who I needed at that point in my life, and I think I was the same for her. As for Wendy, I haven't heard from her since the divorce was finalized. I don't know if she's still with that guy from the photos, and to be honest, I don't care anymore. It took me a while to let go of the anger I held toward her, but I got there eventually. I realized that holding on to bitterness was only keeping me stuck in the past, reliving moments I couldn't change. If she's happy, good for her. If she's not, that's not my problem. I've got my own life to focus on now, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Work has been steady. I picked up a consulting gig with a smaller firm, one that doesn't demand insane hours or constant travel. It's been a much-needed change. For the first time in years, I have time to focus on me, on rebuilding parts of my life I didn't even know needed attention. I've started going to the gym again, something I let slip away during the chaos of it all. There's something satisfying about pushing myself, seeing progress in small ways, feeling stronger each day. It's a reminder that I'm moving forward. I even picked up a couple of new hobbies. Cooking, for one, not just heating up leftovers, but actually learning how to make real meals. I've also started painting, though I'm under no illusions about my skills. I'm no artist, but the act of creating something just for myself has been surprisingly therapeutic. I've made some new friends, too. I joined a hiking group and another for music lovers. Meeting people who only know me as the person I am now, not the guy tangled up in the wreckage of his past, has been refreshing. I thought I'd miss having someone like Elton as my best friend, but the truth is, I don't. I've realized I don't need relationships built on unhealthy dynamics or constant second-guessing. The friends I have now are people I can trust without feeling like I need to test that trust all the time. And yeah, I've dipped my toes back into dating. Nothing serious, just a few casual dates here and there. I'm in no rush to dive into something I'm not ready for. This time around, I'm being honest with myself about what I want, what I need, and what I deserve. It's refreshing to get to know someone without that pressure to make it work at all costs. So, I guess what I'm saying is, I'm okay. Really okay. A year ago, I didn't think I'd get to this point. Back then, it felt impossible. The weight of everything, Wendy, Elton, Madison, the mess I made, felt like it would crush me. But slowly, piece by piece, I started shedding that weight. Life's not perfect now, but it's mine, and that's enough. I'm still figuring things out. I'm still learning how to trust again. Still working through the mistakes I made, and still getting comfortable with the person I'm becoming. But every day feels just a little lighter than the one before. And that's more progress than I ever could have hoped for. I'm not the same person I was before everything fell apart. And honestly, I think that's a good thing. I've learned to let go of people, of expectations, of this need to control everything. Life is unpredictable, messy, and chaotic, but that doesn't mean it's not worth living. Maybe that's the most important thing I've come to understand. So yeah, I'm doing okay. Maybe even better than okay. I'm still here. I'm still standing. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what's next. Whatever it is, I know I'll be ready.